Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon, and thank you all very much for joining us at the third of our COVID-19 webinar series. My name's Will Alstein, and I'm the Global Commercial Director for YouGov. Before we go any further, a little bit of housekeeping, if I may. We're on voice only for this call to ensure that we've got full bandwidth. If you have any questions, then we've opened the chat function in Zoom here, so please do, as we go along, jot down any questions that you have for us, and we'll try and come back and answer as many of those as we possibly can at the end of the session. We're also recording this webinar, and we will share a copy of the slides with you afterwards. So please don't feel as though you have to scribble endless notes, take screenshots, or copy down links. This will all be provided to you along with the commentary. So let's crack on. Today we're here to talk about the Consumer Monitor and our economic recovery update, focusing on the USA. What I will cover over the next 45 minutes, giving chance for questions at the end, is a very brief summary of the free and commercial data sets available from YouGov and our work around COVID-19, which is based on serving the public good. What I'll then do is walk through our insights from our commercial data sets. So looking at consumer perception of the situations and concerns, perceptions of government handling of the situation, and changes in behaviour. What I'll focus on towards the end is looking more at our economic recovery data. How hard have households been hit? What are concerns for the outlook, both of the global economy and the US economy? How do people feel about jobs and security? And I'll finally take a look at some of the consumer habits following the pandemic. YouGov's answer to a crystal ball, if you like, trying to look in and understand what changes in behavior are likely to be sticky and remain in the months to come. I'll then very briefly wrap up with where we're going with our COVID data sets and then give you the chance to ask questions at the end. But please do note them down as we go and we'll get round to them at the end. So, YouGov's work on COVID-19. When the pandemic broke, our global CEO was very, very clear in what he thought YouGov's mission was. And it is about serving the public good. What does serving the public good mean? Well, it's giving everybody a voice, giving people around the world the opportunity to contribute their views, have their views heard, and package up that data in a meaningful way so that we can deliver it to organizations and governments to inform them and give them the ammunition to help better fight the pandemic. So with that in mind, what we've done is create 3 distinct data sets. And what I'm showing on screen now is a summary of what we're doing. We have our behavioral data, we have our public data, and those are both about serving the public good. Open source, free to use, anyone can use them. And I'll explain a little more about each of these in a little while. And then we've got our commercial trackers, commercial data sets designed for our clients and available on subscription. As I said, let's delve into a little more about these. So what do we mean by our behavioral data and how does it help serve the public good? Well, our behavioral data has been created in association with Imperial College London, in particular their division called the Institute for Global Health Innovation. It is one of the world's leading centres of epidemiology and one of the many university hospitals from around the world that is in the race to create a vaccine. And in conjunction with our advisors at Imperial, what we've done is create a global survey spanning 29 countries. It really tries to understand the population in terms of their behaviour, their concerns, their trust, their symptoms, and their readiness to comply with government policy. Now, armed with this data, governments and public health makers can make better informed policy and better informed strategic communication decisions to help control the pandemic. Data are being used by agencies such as the World Health Organization, charities, and many other public institutions to help fight this disease. Moreover, for the first time in YouGov's history, what we've done is actually make this data open source. So it's there for any organization to use regardless of who you are. Links to the data are available in this presentation, but they're available in two flavors. First of all is our row-level data or flat data files. That's available on GitHub. And you can also look at our behavioral data in dashboard format, which is powered by Tableau and available on Imperial College's coviddatahub.com. Moving on to talk about our public data. So this is data that YouGov has taken as extracts from our commercial trackers and are making this available through our website. The link to that website is available to you on screen now. What we've done is taken a number of the KPIs across fears around the disease, government handling, adoption and compliance with government measures, impact on personal finances and job security, and made those available in interactive charts spanning all 27 markets where those responses are coming from. So you can look at it by individual market, markets that you're particularly interested in, or by general region, such as the Americas. Data on that public element has just passed the 500,000 survey mark and is still counting every week. So it's a great resource and free and available for all to use. For our clients, what we've done is integrate a number of our COVID tracker data points as new data points and filters in our tools. For those of you not familiar, BrandIndex is our global brand tracking solution. It continuously measures public perception of brands every single day. Tracking brands over a decade, it also gives you a historical and instant view of your brand health and campaign impact. Profiles, well, that is our audience understanding and segmentation tool. It really brings to life any audience that you are interested in by delivering a plethora of information and data points about that audience, enabling you to describe them in incredibly rich detail. So what we've done is enter our COVID data points into those tools to allow you to better plan and assess the impact of COVID-19 on your audience and understand, of course, the impact on your brand and its perception. If you are already a subscriber to our data, but need help finding those points, then please contact your local account team. And of course, if you are interested in anything related to our data products, please get in touch with your local office or do email us at our general inquiries email, which is info@yougov.com. Just a moment to reflect on the data that I'm going to walk through today. We started our consumer monitor back in the USA on the 12th of March. In some APAC markets, we did start slightly earlier in about mid-February, but we grew the scope of our tracking, adding markets as the pandemic spread around the world. And in here, what we cover is three general areas of consumer data. We look at levels of concern, so the impact of COVID-19, trust, travel plans, and perceptions of the global and national situation. We also look at changes in consumer spend, looking at in-store and online. We look at eating habits and cooking behaviors, and changes in dining behavior. And we also cover media consumption, not only looking at channel, but also content. Our economic recovery monitor launched at the end of April / the beginning of May. We developed this second module focusing very much on the economy and people's personal finances. We look at the current situation, people's confidence and outlook. We look at employment status, and finally we look at changing consumer habits, in particular hopefully ones that we might predict as being sticky, or others that have failed to take off. So what I'm going to do today is take you through a high-level tour of that data that I've just explained that we track in our commercial trackers. Of course, given the time limit, I can't cover all of it, but what I will do is try and give you a very insightful update and the best possible overview of what America is thinking and saying at the moment. If you do have any particular areas of interest that you'd like us to delve into, be that particular audiences that you're interested in, or particular areas of focus regarding your business, then please do get in contact with your local YouGov team. If you don't know who to contact, please again use our general email address, info@yougov.com, or look us up online. Right, a word on the sample, if I may. So as I said, we started tracking survey data back in the 12th of March in the US. That was our wave one. There's a fieldwork start dates that I'm showing on screen, and each survey runs for a week, and approximately we're capturing somewhere between 1,000 and 3,000 surveys on a weekly basis. We've broken our commercial data down into blocks. We run in blocks of 8 weeks that clients can subscribe to. The reason that we've done that is obviously we don't know when we started this how long the pandemic would last, or whether people's appetite would be there for, say, a 12-month subscription. So we've done this on an 8-week basis, and what I will present to you today is either all 14 waves that we've conducted to date, and that will be our consumer monitor data. I might start at wave 9, that will be our economic recovery data, or I might just present the latest wave, which was that conducted on June 11 through to 18. The next round of data will be released later this week. So I think it's just worth taking a moment here to pause and reflect on timing, which of course when it comes to COVID is absolutely crucial. Because what we are showing in the data is obviously from June 11 through to 18. What our data won't pick up or isn't picking up is concerns or impact of recent headlines over the last couple of days. And just as to set some context and for the record, so looking at sources from Johns Hopkins, from major news outlets in the US, what we're seeing as of today is 2.4 million cases in the US of coronavirus that have been tested and confirmed, 122,000 deaths related to COVID-19. But over the last day or so, record daily infection rates recorded in several states, in particular California, Texas, Florida, and Arizona, which have seen significant increases, double-digit increases on the number of reported cases since June 18. We've also seen an increase in the US 7-day rolling moving average of the number of infections, although to be clear, deaths do continue to fall at this moment in time, although experience and data from around the rest of the world suggests that death rate is only on a lag to infection. So that's just to set the scene in terms of where we are. Let's get into the data. So the first thing I want to look at is the US perception of the global situation in relation to coronavirus. And what we see here over the last 6 weeks is a narrowing of opinion. In early June, that's wave 13, we saw that half the population thought the global situation was getting better, 49%, and only about a quarter thought that it was getting worse, 26%. That has significantly narrowed in the last week of tracking. We're now seeing a much less rosy picture considering the global outlook, with a third of people now saying that the situation globally is getting worse, and a significant drop from 49 to 43% in the latest wave of people saying the situation is getting better. Now, if we shift that focus of concern to the USA, that narrowing of opinion actually has been amplified. And what we see is a shift in the balance of opinion. We've gone from a situation of more people believing the situation was getting better in early June to a situation where more people believe the situation is getting worse recently. 44% of the population believe that the situation is getting worse in the US, with only 32% compared to the previous week. And similarly, between waves 13 and 14, we've seen a significant fall in the number of people believing the situation is getting better. 10 percentage points in that case to 38%. While increasing concern about the situation is getting worse, that's not translating yet into people's increased concerns about themselves or their family or friends becoming unwell or dying from COVID-19. We've always tracked a question about fear of contracting the virus. We changed it for block 2 to get a more nuanced picture. So we now ask the question of how worried are you that you might become seriously ill or unwell, or how worried are you about your friends and family might become seriously ill or unwell. And what we've seen actually is a relatively static picture over the course of the last 6 weeks, with about over 50% saying that they're concerned about friends and family, and naturally a lower number concerned about their personal circumstances. Given recent events, however, and media news stories, we do expect these figures to rise in the wave that we're releasing next week and the week after. Now, what fuels concern is, in much respect, media stories, government statements, word of mouth, and what the scientific community is saying. What's interesting is the level of trust in each of those groups. And what we're showing on screen here is the percentage of people that trust completely or somewhat what each of these institutions has to say on the COVID-19 situation. What is absolutely clear is that people trust the scientific community and healthcare professionals significantly more than they do the media or the government. Although there are significant fluctuations by those who consider the situation to be getting better, and the situation in the US is getting worse. But let's look at government, and in particular, government handling of the situation. And perhaps this tells us a little, gives us a little clue into why trust in government is so low. And whichever side of the political divide that you stand on, overall perception of government handling of the crisis has deteriorated in recent waves of research. We ask how well or badly we think that the government is handling the situation, and just over half of the population now believes that the government has handled it very or somewhat badly. What I think is actually clearer, and I'm going to show exactly the same data in this chart, but just in an aggregated format. So what I've done is taken the top two boxes, so people who consider very or somewhat government handling as well or badly, and combined them. I think what this gives a better picture of is showing the shift in the balance of opinion, where back in earlier waves of our research, the balance was that the government was handling the situation well, and at week 7, which was the last week in April, what we've seen is a shift from net handling well to net handling the situation badly. But how does that stack up amongst the global citizens and their perceptions of government handling? Well, looking at our global benchmarks, we can see that the perception of the US government handling of coronavirus is towards the bottom of our league table here. Very similar, in fact, to my native UK and the citizens of France perceptions of how their government has handled the situation. I think what's particularly interesting looking at this is look at comparable economies or markets, places like Australia or Germany or Canada. And what we see is that there are significantly higher government approval ratings or handling of the situation ratings, should I say, in each of those markets. Now, in each of those markets, arguably the government was faster to move into lockdown and implement more draconian measures. Now, while those might have been unpopular at the time, as those economies have come out of lockdown or been moving out of lockdown, what we have seen is the government situation ratings are higher. So while people didn't appreciate it at the time, maybe now with hindsight, they are appreciating those harsh and quick moves for action. So if that's looking at government, let's look at personal behaviour change. Wearing of face masks was certainly not the done thing when the pandemic broke across Europe and much of North America. It very much seemed like that was something that APAC economies did. Their experience of things like SARS colouring their behaviour in the first instance. There's also been significant debate, and there still is debate going on in many countries about the impact of face coverings. While I think most agreed it does stop droplets, some argue that it increases the chances of touching your face, but I'm not going to go into that level of argument here. What is interesting from our data is that we have seen dramatic increases in people wearing face masks. Not only here, as we're showing in the USA, of 5% back in early March, to 71% of people saying that they have worn a face covering in the last 2 weeks. But what is interesting, and what we are tracking, and is potentially of some concern, is the decline in other similar personal countermeasures, such as avoiding crowded public spaces, as shown by the latest wave in the green bars that I'm showing. So for example, significant reduction in the last 2 weeks in people saying that they have avoided crowded places, improved their personal hygiene, refrained from touching objects in public, and people avoiding going to work, i.e. returning to work. Now, what is interesting looking at this data is, are we seeing the underlying behavioural trend here that may be in some way influencing a recent spike in infections in recent days. That's for the scientists to answer. I'm just posing the question there. I think key to understanding, if that's looking at consumer behaviour in relation to the virus, what's also very interesting to look at is consumer spend as a result of the virus. What we're showing here on screen is looking at overall spend in store in the last 2 weeks from each wave of research since we started tracking it at the beginning of May, and also looking at overall spend online in the last 2 weeks. And despite some relaxation of lockdown measures, what we are seeing is physical store retail spend continues to show a very gloomy picture. Between June 11 through 18, we saw 40% of Americans claiming that they spent less in physical stores in the last 2 weeks. Now, while the net position for online retail is far less stark, the net position is flat. And what that suggests is that consumer spend is very much in decline rather than being squeezed into different channels. But not all retail is equal, and I think this is pretty much self-explanatory in what we would expect. That if you look at in-store spend, then what we are seeing is that while grocery and toiletries might have held up, and I've just picked two here that I thought might be of interest, looking at entertainment and clothing, the net spend in those stores in the last 2 weeks is down. If you look at online spend, so asking the similar question, looking at how has your spend changed in each of these categories in the last 2 weeks, we can still see that grocery and toiletries are holding up well. 25% of people claiming to spend more on groceries are online, and that is larger than the proportion of people that are spending less. We're seeing about 1 in 5, 18% spending more on toiletries, which is greater than the proportion spending less. But sadly, even online entertainment isn't holding up, at 22% saying that they are spending less. The actual spending more figure is 18% in there. And clothing, we're still not seeing a shift to online either, with significant reductions there. Why are we seeing this reduction in spend? Well, we ask a straight out question on our behavioural and economic recovery data, which is, which if any of the following statements are true about your household in the last month? And my household has. These are pre-coded answers, and that we ask people if they have reduced non-essential expenses, been able to save more, relied on savings, taken on more debt, or done none of the above. Well, what is clear is that 40% or 39% of the population has reduced non-essential expenses, which might account for entertainment, which might account for clothing, and account for many of the other sectors in which we have seen a downturn in spend, both in-store and online. What we've seen, though, is 22%, somewhere between 1 in 5 and a quarter, who have actually been able to save more as a result of restrictions, as a result of not maybe wanting to go out, or engage, or unable to engage in their usual activities and spending patterns, have actually been in a better financial situation as a result of the pandemic. But then there are those that are struggling. They're either dipping into savings or they're taking on debt, with only a third of people claiming that they have done none of the above, and the status quo is is where they are. I think that's a very direct way of getting at some of the spend or reasons for spend. One of the more slightly fun measures or slightly indirect measures as a way of understanding the position that consumers are in is asking them what they would do if they got a windfall. So we ask in the survey question, if you were to receive an unexpected windfall equivalent to a month's household income, what would you do with it? And what's interesting is about half of people would save it in some way, shape or form. Directly into a bank, keep it in cash, or invest in the stock market. 28% are going to repay debts, and only 10% are going to go out and spend it right now. So even if there was a significant injection of cash into households, what we're seeing here is that trickle-down theory would be very much lacking in terms of how that could impact the economy, as people would put it away for a rainy day or use it to pay off debts. Let's move on and look at more of our economic recovery data and take a little wider tour of it. Just as a reminder, we started this module at the end of April or the beginning of May. In fact, back when we presented our last webinar. For those of you that attended that last webinar, some of the data that you will see in here will be familiar, but we have, of course, updated it and provided tracking data herein. In terms of sample, what we're looking at across these charts is a sample of 1,000 nationally representative US citizens, with timing as per earlier conversation. So what we're looking at here is the last wave of data of June 11 through 18. Now, looking at the macro picture, we ask what people are concerned about. And we ask a number of things, but included in that is, are they concerned about local businesses failing? Are they concerned about a global recession? Are they concerned about banks failing? And what I am reporting here is, again, tracking percentages of the top two answers. So those people who are very or just concerned about each of these measures. I think in general, what is encouraging from this chart is seeing a slow but significant decline since in all of these concerns since we started tracking them back at the beginning of May. What people are more concerned about, however, is local businesses failing. There's obviously concern about a global recession, with a particular decrease in the last wave of tracking, from 76 to 69% of people concerned about that. Perhaps fueled by economies coming out of lockdown and appearing in some countries, at least, to get back to normal. Thankfully, what we're also seeing is a decline in people who are concerned about banks failing. Although that is still, I would say, a slightly worryingly high percentage at just over 2 in 5, 42% concerned about banks failing in the current climate. For those of us that lived through the last financial crisis, obviously that is a significant concern that banks fail. Let's hope and pray that that number continues to fall and the banks do not fail. Focusing though on the US economy in particular, We've asked people continuously how they believe, what they state they believe the US economy is likely to be in 12 months' time. Back when we started tracking this in May, we saw 23% would consider the economy booming or growing. About half, 47%, saying that in 12 months' time we'll be in a depression or a recession. And there was another 30% or so sitting in the middle, either unsure or thinking that the economy would remain stable. Now, actually, the tracking data suggests very little movement in these numbers. There's a slight movement from those saying that we will be in a depression or a recession to those saying, well, actually, I don't know. But it goes to show that there is still some, a quarter of people saying that they are quite optimistic and, in fact, bullish about the state of the economy. But there are almost twice the number of bears. Focusing now, going in again, looking now at the micro picture. So looking at households in particular. And we ask two questions for households. We ask if, compared to 1 month ago, how has your household financial situation changed? And we also ask the follow-up question of how do you believe your household situation will change in the next 12 months? And what we're seeing is over the last month, the net position of US households is worse than the previous 30 days. However, what we are seeing, again, is a slightly more positive outlook about the future. But significantly more people saying that they're not sure as well. But what is encouraging, I think, is that 24% of people who certainly believe that their situation will be better in 12 months' time, and the net position of better minus the worse is also a positive story to tell. However, there are still significant concerns around people being able to A, pay bills, and B, pay the rent. Now, data hasn't changed much over the last 6 weeks. It's been relatively flat. But what we're looking at is, in the latest wave, 44% of all Americans saying that they have some concern about being able to pay their bills, and 37% of all Americans saying that they've got concerns about paying the rent. Now, both of those tracking measures, interestingly, of course, some might say, are higher amongst workers, so those currently in employment. Just like to move on to thinking about employment. Look at job security, and look at job security as a composite measure, but also look at it in relation to business activity, because the two go hand in hand. And we ask two questions here. So compared to 1 month ago, how secure do you feel your job is? More secure, less secure, or no change? And what we're showing is the net score here. So this is more secure minus less secure. What we're also showing is another question, which is relation to business activity. And the question there is, compared to 1 month ago, how has the level of business activity at your place of work gone up, gone down, or stayed the same? And again, I'm showing net here, so we're looking at increase minus decrease. And what we can see when we started tracking this back at the beginning of May is that there was a significant net decrease in business activity, which was also met with a net concerns or people feeling less secure about their job. Now, thankfully, especially in the last wave of tracking, what we have seen is those scores turn from negative for business activity into a positive, single digit maybe, but that is still a very positive story to tell. Tracking alongside that, as employees see the level of business activity at their place of work increase, so they feel more secure in their job. I won't dwell on this chart, but that is in the deck should you wish to see it. But that's looking at the latest wave of those two previous measures broken down in detail. Now, finally, what I would like to look at is future consumer habits. We're tracking a number of these, and we went into these with a number of hypotheses. Are there some re-emerging consumer trends that have, let's say, died away in recent years that might be brought back as a result of coronavirus? And are there some existing trends out there that will be accelerated as a result of coronavirus? Now, again, for the purposes of you receiving this deck, what I have done is show you the tracking data over the course for each of these measures that we are tracking. I'm not going to dwell on these because actually the data is relatively flat across the 6 waves that we've been tracking. What I think is more important to look at is the overall scores and where Americans see the most significant changes to their habits. So, top of the list, and the biggest lifestyle change that Americans plan to make or continue is to support local businesses much more. 2/3 of people saying that they are going to do that. And if you think back earlier to the top of the economic recovery data that we show, well, what we saw there is the biggest concern was of local businesses failing. So it's lovely to see, one, that our data makes sense in that regard, but that two, that consumers not only are concerned about it, but are going to drive or are driving action to support local businesses. Of course, the implication for that, for businesses, is not only a nod to the local business, but of course, in marketing communications and product solutions, focusing on local solutions and the local nature of any business is likely to play into consumer wishes and demands. What we're also seeing is people saying that they are going to make more use of online shopping than they have in the future, accelerating the existing trend that is out there. One in particular that's especially that I think is relevant to the US, where there is a significant amount of business travel. Less so maybe in other parts of the world, in Europe is an example. But I will travel much less for work. 1/3 of the population saying that that is a trend that they are going to take forward from now and into the foreseeable future. A similar number saying that they're going to buy more green or sustainable products. Interesting. We thought that perhaps as a result of examining behavior, as a result of a global pandemic, that people might focus more on their consumer choices and their purchase behavior. And it certainly looks as though 1/3 of the population is likely to reflect a more green or sustainable purchase behavior in the future. Cash, similar levels of cash. We've seen, certainly anecdotally and now in our tracking data, that people are reluctant to use cash in some quarters of the population. As people move towards more online payment, as people use towards more digital payment solutions in physical stores, and the perception of cash is that it is let's call it what it is. It's a piece of paper that is passed from hand to hand, or coin to coin, is going hand to hand, which is a potential carrier of disease and infection. People are realizing that and intend to use cash less in the future. Similarly, people willing to work from home more, as you know, that's accelerated a trend that I think was growing anyway, as we've all become used to Zoom calls or Microsoft Teams, or whatever it is that people are using to stream video conference, where possible. Of course, not everyone is an office worker, but where possible, it certainly looks like more will work from home. But also taking more active part in the local community. So I'm going to draw us to a close there in terms of looking at our overall data. I hope that's given you a flavour of the tracking data that we have. I hope that's given you some insight into what America is thinking and doing and is likely to do in the future. And of course, if you'd like any further information around our tracking products, please do get in touch with us. Your local office or info@yougov.com. Very briefly, what I'm going to touch on is what is happening next in regards to our COVID tracking. And what we're doing is we're going into block 3. We're making an assessment of the markets that we've covered, and which ones we're going to carry forward into block 3. We're also, of course, looking for client input into the questions that we cover. So if you do have any feedback on that, we'd be delighted to hear. What is likely to happen is, as we did between blocks 1 and block 2, is evolve the questionnaire. Some questions are due for retirement. They're either tracking at 100% or they don't necessarily make sense, given how the virus has moved and developed. And of course, there are new variables that people will want to track. So do watch this space and our newsletters for further details. Right. On to your questions in the last 10 minutes or so that we have on this call. So Sarah has been looking at the questions. Sarah, is there anything in particular that has dropped out that you feel is worth the first question?
Yeah, so one of the questions we got was, do you feel it is a paradox that people aren't spending as much, nor do they intend to, yet they expect the economy to get better? And then it also adds, which can happen if consumer spending is at 70% of the economy.
So, to a certain extent, absolutely, I agree. There are, but I think the picture is slightly nuanced there. There are sections of the population that do believe the US economy is going to grow. It's about a quarter of the population. There is also about 22% of people who say that they have saved more over the pandemic. While spending in certain categories has declined, there are those who are sitting there potentially waiting to come back and spend. I appreciate that is not the full story, and there are many, many ways of looking at this data. But I think actually if you go into and track individuals' journeys or individual audience journeys through this data, it doesn't actually show a paradox. What it actually shows is a remarkable consistency in the narrative. I hope that's answered the question in full, but obviously delighted to continue that after this if necessary. Sarah.
Yes, next question. So it goes back to that slide we had on the situation getting better versus worse. Do we have the option to have a crosstab breakout, so breaking out specifically the red and blue states as a breakdown?
So YouGov certainly does hold all sorts of additional data on demographics, on location, on political affiliation. Yes, that data can be broken by party affiliation. It can be broken by, I would say, general geography. Obviously, when you get down to even state level, what you see is a number of states with far too small a sample to be statistically robust. But yes, in short answer to the question, we can break that data by situation getting better, getting worse. I purposefully haven't looked at the data. I didn't want to get dragged into the political debate in here. Just merely talk about general situations and perceptions of government handling. But again, if you want to have that further data, then please do get in contact with your local YouGov office. Sarah.
Yep. Do you expect price sensitivity post-pandemic, or do consumers expect things to cost the same as before? Or are they going to be looking for value more than before?
Value is a really interesting topic at the moment. At YouGov, we're having a number of discussions with organizations, both trade associations, publishers such as the Business of Fashion, and of course clients and agencies and brands like those on this call. What I think is interesting, and I'm very keen to do some more exploration to this, is looking at value. We're certainly seeing some people, about a third of the population, saying that they want to buy more sustainable or green products. Now, what does that actually mean underneath it? Does that mean that we are going to see the beginning of the end of consumerism, of, for example, cheap fashion? Will people be willing to invest in slightly higher priced products that represent good value, but are more durable? So it's a really interesting question that I wish I had the answer to. But do watch this space for further data on that one in particular. Sarah, I think we've probably got time for a couple more, but I'm really enjoying these, so do keep the questions coming, please.
I was going to say, if anyone else would like to submit any more questions, those are the current questions we have in the chat, though.
Okay, fine. In which case, I will bring this to a close. So just leaves me to say thank you very much to Sarah. Thank you very much to all of the YouGov team behind this, but of course, thank you to our clients for attending today's session. I hope you have a great day and wish you well. Goodbye.